The wind howled like a starving beast across the hollowed-out wastelands of Kaldric's floor, carrying the taste of burnt metal and dust from cities that once pulsed with life. Lights flickered in the clouds above, remnants of broken satellites or falling debris no one knew anymore. War had left this planet cracked open like a scorched fruit, and now the survivors lived in the pits of their memories, gnawing on the bones of what used to be. Somewhere near the equator line, under the shattered skeleton of a collapsed hydro station, a lone human woman named Rhea stumbled through the ash. Her breath came hard, not just from exhaustion or the jagged lung scratches of the poisoned air, but from fear. Something had followed her for 3 days, and she didn't know what. It was never close enough to see, never far enough to forget. Her tracker was dead, her squad long gone, and the emergency beacon she'd clung to like prayer had been cracked against a rock during the escape from the last ambush. Rhea knew she should have died already. Logic demanded it. The math of war said a lone human, wounded and unarmed, did not survive 3 days in Scorched Zone Alpha, but still she moved, as if something larger than herself refused to let go. Then it appeared again. Not a sound, not a shout, just the cold hush of movement through broken steel and stone. She froze under the dangling remnants of a collapsed turbine. Her pulse thundered, but she didn't reach for a weapon. She didn't have one. Only a shard of glass wrapped in cloth, a pitiful thing. She closed her eyes. Footsteps now, slow, deliberate, not like the berserker droids or slaver patrols. This was different. And then she saw him or it stepping out from the shadows, like a ghost from her nightmares. Tall, slender, cloaked in layers of iridescent armor, curved and alien, his skin the color of mercury but shifting in the light like oil over water. His eyes glowed a soft amber, not harsh, not cruel, just searching, watching, the same one. She knew it now. This was the thing that had spared her 3 days ago, when her squad was ambushed. She had looked up from the blood and smoke, seen that face, those eyes, and for some reason, it had turned and vanished into the fire. Now it had returned. Rhea did not run. She did not scream. She merely waited, shoulders slumped, half expecting him to raise some unknowable weapon and finish what was started. Instead, he reached into a satchel across his chest and pulled out a canister. Slowly, carefully, he placed it on the ground between them and stepped back. Water, filtered, clean, real. Her lips parted. It felt like a hallucination. She took a step forward, then paused, looking into his eyes for permission or a trap. He said nothing. His mouth didn't even move, but his head tilted an unmistakable gesture of offering. She knelt, snatched the canister, unscrewed it with trembling hands, and drank like the dead relearning life. Her body shivered from the cold liquid, and tears welled before she could stop them. She didn't know why. It wasn't just thirst, it was the impossible kindness, the gesture that shouldn't be. He was an alien, a Xhaari. Their worships had burned 3 human colonies to ash. Their language was made of electric pulses and muscle shifts. They did not feel, did not pity. And yet here he stood, still watching her, not like a predator, more like a question. The silence stretched between them like a bridge, made of something fragile and raw. She rose slowly, wiping her mouth, blood still crusting one temple, hair matted with sweat. Why? She whispered, more to herself than to him. Why didn't you kill me? He didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't, but the way he looked at her, it wasn't disinterest. It was memory, recognition, as if something inside him had fractured once, just like her, and the broken edges matched out then, without a word. He turned and walked away, but only a few steps before stopping and looking back, his glowing eyes lingering on her face. He extended one arm slightly, beckoning Dot an invitation. Rhea hesitated. Every part of her screamed not to trust. But her feet moved, and as she crossed the distance between them, a strange pulse stirred in her chest. Not just survival, but something else. Something unspoken, something ancient. Like hope growing out of ruin. She didn't know what he wanted, didn't know where they were going. But something told her she'd just stepped into a story far larger than her own, and she wasn't ready to die yet. Rhea followed the alien through the bones of her dying world, her feet dragging through ash and the brittle remains of what used to be roads. The silence between them stretched thin like a thread made of breath and tension. He never looked back, but his pace adjusted to match hers, not too fast, not too slow, just enough to tell her she was not a prisoner and not alone. The strangest thing was that she didn't feel afraid, not really. Her heartbeat still spiked at every sudden movement, every rustle in the wind, but it wasn't because of him. It was the rest of the world she feared now. The sky burned red, and forever bleeding smoke. The ground, littered with memories, turned to rubble. The people she couldn't save, but not him. She should have feared him. He was Xhaari, one of the elite, those who walked like living myths and killed like a whisper. She had seen one slice through 6 armored troopers like they were made of fabric. And yet, this one had offered her water. This one had spared her. When the rest of her team had fallen screaming into the dirt, she wanted to ask him his name, but she didn't know how. The translators had broken after the 3rd orbital strike. Their languages weren't meant to mesh. The Xhaari communicated, through frequencies that bend around the human ear, through flashes of skin light that carried emotion more than words. But she tried anyway. "I'm Rhea," she said softly, her voice cracked and dry again, though she had water in her pack now. "You probably don't care that that's my name." She wasn't sure why she spoke to him at all. Maybe just to hear something human. Maybe because silence made the memories louder. He glanced at her then, the movement sharp and subtle, and for a moment, the plates of his armor shimmered blue, only a faint glow, but Rhea paused. That color, wasn't that the one they used for peace or greeting? She had read the files long ago, back when diplomacy was still possible, back when Xhaari were just distant shapes in orbit, and not monsters burning through cities. Blue. She stared at him. He had responded. "So you were listening," she said, a little louder now, stepping beside him instead of behind. "You understand me, don't you?" No answer, but again the faint flicker of color along his chest, slower this time. Acknowledgement. He led her into a structure that barely stood anymore, what had once been a transport bay, now stripped of its roof and most of its walls. The remains of vehicles lay like rotting insects along the floor. But there was shelter here, and a heat lamp that somehow still functioned, humming quietly beside a cobbled-together power unit that looked half Xhaari, half human tech. She turned to him sharply. "You've been here a while," she realized. "You weren't just passing through." He didn't respond in words, but he sat down, the movement fluid and strange, almost ceremonial, and gestured toward the lamp. She sat too, unsure what else to do, and let the warmth bleed into her skin. Her fingers began to thaw. Her mind slowly started to process again. They sat like that for hours. No words, no questions, just presence. In the quiet, she noticed little things. How he sometimes turned his head toward the wind, as if listening for something. How he pressed 2 fingers to his throat once and emitted a short pulse of sound too low for her to hear. Maybe a message, maybe a prayer. And how he kept. Glancing at her wounds, her arm, still torn from the fall, her side wrapped in cloth soaked red. She caught him staring and raised her brow. "I've had worse," she said with a tired smile. "Don't worry. We humans are annoyingly hard to kill." She wasn't sure why she joked, but something about his silence made her want to fill it with life. Then something changed. He reached into a satchel again, this time pulling out a glowing piece of gel that shimmered with internal light. He motioned for her to give him her arm. She hesitated. Her instinct said to pull away, but her gut said otherwise. Slowly, she extended the limb. Gently, with hands more careful than she expected, he smeared the gel across the torn flesh. A cold burn spread through her, but then came warmth, then numbness, then relief. The pain dulled. She looked at him, stunned. "You're helping me. Why?" she whispered. "Why me?" And this time, he responded, not in words, but a section of his armor peeled back at the wrist, revealing a scar, not fresh, not old, a jagged mark that looked eerily human in origin. Like a knife wound, self-inflicted, or from battle. She couldn't tell, but the message was clearer. He had been hurt too. He had chosen not to kill her, and now he was showing her his own pain. A slow realization crept over her like sunlight through storm clouds. Maybe this wasn't random. Maybe he'd known what it meant to show mercy. Maybe she reminded him of something or someone. Maybe he had spared her not out of logic, but out of something deeper, recognition, regret, or even guilt. Rhea leaned back and stared at the burned-out sky through the missing roof, the stars long lost behind clouds of war. "We're both broken," she said quietly. "Maybe that's why we found each other." And though he didn't answer, she swore she saw a pulse of blue, slow and bright, glow once more along his chest, an echo of understanding. The days bled into one another like colors in smoke, and time no longer moved in minutes or hours for Rhea. It shifted in the rhythm of survival, marked by breath, warmth, and the silent company of the alien who walked beside her. They traveled across the jagged spine of what used to be a mountain range, now buckled from orbital fire, the land itself scarred like a wounded animal. Every step was a prayer against collapse, yet Rhea began to feel something she hadn't in months. Presence. Not just being alive, but being seen. The Xhaari had started calling him Solace in her mind, because he had no name she could speak move like a shadow. When danger neared and stood like a monument when the night grew still. They shared food without language, navigated wreckage without maps, and as her wounds healed, so did something deeper inside her, a piece she hadn't even known had been broken, until his silence started filling it. One evening, after crossing a blasted-out riverbed where the bones of tanks and children lay together, Rhea found herself sitting beside a half-buried memory. A doll, melted plastic, one button eye, a head scorched to ash. Her fingers trembled as she reached for it. Her brother had given her a doll like that once before the war, before the evacuation ships turned to flame midair, before her childhood was shredded by sound and fire. She hadn't cried since the invasion. She thought her tears had burned out with her home. But now they returned, not in sobs, but in quiet tremors that made her shoulders quake. She didn't make a sound, but Solace saw. He didn't move at first, but after a long moment, he knelt beside her, not close, not touching, but present. As if saying, I see what you carry. I carry it too. Without a word, he unlatched a small device from his side, flicked it open, and projected a soft image into the air. A family, his, or at least Rhea assumed it was. The figures were not human, but the posture was unmistakable. 2 adults, one smaller childlike figure between them, leaning close as if laughing. The image flickered, glitched, and vanished. But the emotion stayed behind, sharp and fragile. Rhea stared at him. You lost them, she said quietly, though he hadn't spoken a word. Just like I did. She didn't expect a response. But to her shock, he tapped his chest, where his heart might have been, and then pointed to her, slowly, with deliberation. Again, you, me, same. The motion broke something open inside her because it wasn't just a gesture. It was a declaration. He was saying across the gulf of language, species, war, I feel what you feel. The days after that changed everything. They moved together not as strangers, but as companions. Rhea began to teach him words, simple ones like fire, food, danger, and safe. He absorbed them with eerie precision, and in return, he taught her the emotional. Flashes of his kind colors, patterns, rhythms that meant gratitude, sorrow, warning. A flicker of violet meant quiet now. A slow rise of amber meant, I'm here. And one night, as they huddled in a ruin against the shriek of a storm that tore roofs off like paper, she saw him emit a long, pulsing blue light deeper than the others. She turned to him. What does that mean? He looked at her, touched. His wrist where the scar was, then touched her shoulder gently. The gesture was soft, respectful. Then he pulsed the blue again. She didn't understand fully, but she felt it. Like an apology and a promise. Like he was saying, I failed someone. Once. I won't fail you. They stayed in that ruined city for 3 days, scavenging parts, sharing supplies, and repairing a comms relay in silence and light. Rhea laughed once, actually laughed, when Solace tried to eat an old ration bar and immediately spat it out with an offended ripple of red across his faceplate. It had tasted like plastic and regret. She hadn't laughed since her father died on Arkan Station, burned alive while she watched helpless from a dropship. She had thought laughter was gone from her, but Solace had given it back, one night, as stars pierced the clouds for the first time in months. They lay under the remains of a rusted transport shuttle, watching the sky. Rhea pointed to a cluster of stars shaped like a crooked W. We used to call that the Queen's Crown, she said. My mother told me stories about it. Said if you could still see it, the world hadn't ended yet. She turned to him. What did you call it? Solace didn't speak. But his armor shimmered with that same deep blue, slow and resonant. He tapped his wrist again, then gestured upward. Then he opened his hand and let a small metal shard fall into her palm. A memory chip, human-made. Her breath caught. Where did you get this? He didn't answer, but in that moment, Rhea understood something was waiting to be uncovered, something bigger than survival, bigger than them, a truth buried in silence, and she knew she would follow him, anywhere to find it. Asterisk, the morning began with smoke rising from the east, thin and black, curling against the pale sky like a message written in the language of warning. Rhea stood on the edge of the crumbled freeway, watching it rise in the distance. Her fingers clutched the memory chip Solace had given her the night before, its surface warm from her palm, as if it remembered too much. Something about it unsettled her, not because she feared what was on it, but because of the way Solace had given it to her. Not as a gift, not as an offering, but as a confession they traveled toward the smoke, driven not by logic but by instinct. Solace grew quieter, if that was even possible. His light language became subdued, pulsing with hesitant tones, as if he were preparing for something heavy. Rhea wanted to ask, what was this place? Why now? What's on the chip? But she knew he wouldn't answer, or couldn't, so she let silence fill the space between them until the horizon split open and the ruins of a former human communications outpost rose before them like a blackened cathedral of steel and regret. The entrance was buried, twisted beams like claws reaching out of the earth. Solace knelt beside them and touched the ground with his palm. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low hum echoed beneath their feet and a panel clicked open a hidden door. Shielded from scanners, buried under war and time, Rhea followed him into the dark. The air inside was stale, tinged with rust and old blood. The walls were still lined with flickering displays and shattered monitors. Solace moved through them like a ghost returning to a grave dot at the heart of the chamber. A console still flickered faintly, powered by some unknown source. Solace gestured for her to insert the chip. Rhea hesitated, then stepped forward and slid it into the reader. The screen crackled, buzzed, then bloomed to life, and what she saw made her knees go weak. It was footage from orbit. A date stamped 2 months before the invasion began. Human and Xhaari officials in the same room negotiating, trading files, shaking hands. Peace talks. And in the middle of it all, a face she knew too well. Her father, General Alaric Tenmore. Still alive? Then, speaking directly to the Xhaari leader Solace, not in armor, not in silence. Speaking with words through a translator, standing as an ambassador, not a soldier. The image shook her. Her mind reeled. You, she whispered, spinning to face him, heart hammering. You weren't just part of the war. You tried to stop it. His light flickered gold, then blue, then darkened again. The footage continued. A new image, now warships, human, firing on a Xhaari peace convoy. Without warning, screams, panic, flame. Rhea stared in horror. No, that can't be right. We didn't fire first. But the screen didn't lie. The data logs confirmed it. A rogue faction human, radical, anti-alien had sabotaged the peace agreement, assassinated Xhaari diplomats, blamed the attack on the Xhaari to ignite the war and gain control of the dwindling resources left on the outer systems. It hadn't been vengeance. It had been strategy, cold, calculated. Human. Her throat tightened. We started it, she whispered. We lit the match. Solace didn't move. His stillness was louder than shouting. And you, she began, her voice trembling, you were supposed to be one of them? The first peace bearers. She looked into his eyes. That convoy we destroyed was your family on it? His chest lit with red, not rage, but grief. Deep, endless grief. Then he pulsed blue again, slow. Forgiving. She took a step back, suddenly sick. Her knees buckled, and she sat hard on the metal floor. All her life she had fought under the banner of survival, believed in the rightness of their cause. Humanity, standing strong against an invading force. But it had been built on a lie. Her father had tried to make peace. He had died for it. And the one who had more right than anyone to burn the world in revenge had instead spared her. You had every reason to hate us, she said, her voice hoarse. Every right to kill me, and you didn't. Solace moved closer. Slowly, carefully, he knelt beside her and placed one hand against her chest, right above her heart, then his other hand against his own, and he lit blue once more. The message was simple. It ends with us. They sat together in the ruin of truth, the past bleeding out in flickering light. And for the first time, Rhea didn't feel like a survivor or a soldier or even a victim. She felt like something more terrifying and more powerful. She felt responsible, and she would not let that truth die buried in some forgotten ruin. The wind outside screamed like a wounded creature as Rhea and Solace emerged from the buried outpost, their faces cast in the low, flickering light of a dying sun. The memory chip had changed everything, not just the shape of the war in her mind, but the shape of herself. She couldn't unsee it, couldn't unfeel it. Her people had drawn first blood, had orchestrated the firestorm under the lie of righteousness. And in the ruins of peace, men like her father had burned trying to hold it together. Now she knew the truth. And now she had to carry it. But how do you carry a truth so heavy it could shatter worlds? They didn't speak as they traveled again. This time, cutting north toward the last known coordinates of a resistance enclave, a human settlement hiding in the mountain folds, buried deep and afraid. Solace had found it days ago in a broken transmission. that barely hissed through the static. Rhea clung to it like a last ember. If anyone could use the truth she now carried, it was them. But something in the air had changed. Attention. The world itself felt like it was holding its breath. The closer they got to the mountains, the worse the signs became. Scorched trees, melted stone, charred bodies that looked like they'd been frozen mid-scream, their outlines seared into the walls. No Xhaari weapons made that kind of ruin. This was human fire, human rage. Someone had reached the enclave before them. Then came the trap. It happened near dusk. They were passing through a narrow canyon, the walls close and steep, when the sky cracked open with the sound of thunder, but not natural thunder. Railguns. Someone had them in their sights before Rhea even realized it. The blast hit just behind them, sending up a fountain of earth and debris that slammed her forward. She hit the ground hard, her ears ringing, lungs burning. Solace had already spun to shield her, his armor absorbing the impact of the second round. She saw the burn marks searing across his back, the energy hissing through the plating. He didn't cry out. He never did. Don't move. A voice shouted from above. She looked up, blinking through blood and dust, and saw them human soldiers, not resistance. Uniforms too clean, equipment too new. Private faction, mercenaries, probably the same kind that had started the war. And now they'd come to silence what she knew. Step away from it. One barked, back away from the alien. Rhea stood, swaying, rage building in her chest like wildfire. He saved me. He saved us. You have no idea what's really. I said step away. Solace moved between her and the guns, raising both hands, not in surrender, but in caution. Trying to de-escalate, but they weren't listening. One raised his rifle and fired without warning. It hit Solace in the chest. He stumbled. Not far, but it was enough to push Rhea beyond the edge of reason. She lunged, not with a weapon, not with violence, but with her voice. Stop, she screamed, throwing herself in front of him. If you kill him, you kill our last chance. You kill peace. You kill the truth. They paused, uncertain. Then she pulled the chip from her coat, holding it up like a talisman. This contains the footage from the original breach. The truth. About how the war started. The proof that it wasn't them. It was us. I've seen it. I lived it. And if you kill him now, then you prove we're no better than the monsters we think we're fighting. The silence was deafening. The soldiers looked at each other, confusion flickering across their faces. But then the leader, an older man, with cold eyes, stepped forward. Orders are clear. No aliens. No evidence. No loose ends. He raised his gun. Solace moved again, despite his wound, ready to intercept the shot. But this time, Rhea reached into her pocket, pulled out the emergency flare Solace had repaired 3 nights ago, and ignited it. The sky lit up with burning red fire visible for miles. She didn't know if the resistance would see it. Didn't know if anyone would come. But she had to try. The soldier cursed, raised his weapon again, but a distant sound cut through the canyon. A roar, engines, old but fast. A resistance skiff, armored, barreling through the dust. Someone had seen it. Chaos exploded in the gorge. As bullets cracked the air and the mercs scattered for cover, Rhea dove to shield Solace as debris rained around them. The skiff screeched to a halt beside them, and a voice shouted, "Get in!" She dragged Solace up, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, blood trickling into her eye. Together, they leapt onto the skiff as it roared away, engines screaming. Rhea clutched him tightly, her hand pressed to the smoking wound in his chest. He was heavy, too heavy. His lights flickered, dimmed. "No," she whispered. "No, stay with me. You don't get to die now. Not after all of this." His head turned slightly. One last shimmer of blue flickered over his armor. "I'm still here," but the message was fainter now, and the war had just become personal. The skiff tore through the wastelands like a wounded animal chased by ghosts, its hull battered, its engine whining in protest. Rhea held onto Solace, her arms wrapped tight around his failing frame as the wind whipped through her tangled hair. Blood soaked her sleeve, not her own. His lights were dim now, pulsing weakly at irregular intervals. He had taken the hitman for her again, and though his kind did not bleed like humans, something about the weight of him, the slackness in his movements, terrified her more than bullets or bombs ever had. She looked down at his face, where his eyes flickered, searching for focus, then dimmed again. The Resistance enclave was carved into the cliffs above an old geothermal station, camouflaged by crumbling rock and decades of secrets. The skiff screeched to a halt before the steel gates, which opened slowly under the scanning beams of the sentries. As they pulled Solace down onto a stretcher, Dozens of eyes turned to her, some confused, others afraid. None trusted the alien. In their midst, not yet. She could feel the judgment like a weight around her neck. But she didn't care. They took him to a small med bay retrofitted from a reactor control room. The lights buzzed. The walls smelled of rust and old regret. Rhea stood outside the glass, watching as technicians hovered over him, unsure what to do. He wasn't human. Their medicine wasn't designed for this, but they tried anyway. Tried. Because she begged them to. And because she had told them the truth. She had shown the memory chip. Played it over and over until even the most hardened among them looked away in shame. They'd sent word to the higher enclaves. Word of the footage. Word of the betrayal. A fire had been lit in the cold dark, and now it spread faster than the wind, but it came at a cost. Solace was dying. And the people outside the room where he lay still doubted. Whether he was worth saving. Then came the transmission. It wasn't coded. Wasn't secret. It was a broadcast blunt and arrogant. The mercenary captain, the one who had fired the shot, his voice booming through stolen frequency. To the human who protects the alien, he said, his tone oily with contempt. You are harboring a traitor to your kind. That data chip is a fabrication. Turn it over, and we may let your people live. Deny us, and we'll raise every hole you hide in. The room fell into chaos, shouting, panic, accusation. We can't fight. They'll come in numbers. She brought this down on us. It's her alien, they're here for him. Rhea stood in the center of it all, breath ragged, heart pounding. Then she turned to face them, her voice cutting like a blade. They're not coming for him, they're coming for the truth. You think handing it over will save you? You think lies protect us? No, lies cost us this war, lies cost us peace. We lost entire worlds because we let fear speak louder than facts. A man stepped forward, gray-bearded, commander of the enclave. We understand what's at stake, but we have to survive. We can't fight their firepower. We don't have to win with firepower, she snapped. We have to win with what? They're trying to bury, with truth, the commander sighed. So what are you suggesting? Rhea looked back through the glass. Solace was still, but not gone. His light flickered softly at the base of his throat, faint blue. Still here. I'm going to meet them, she said, alone. The room erupted in disbelief. They'll kill you. They'll take the chip. You can't. I'm going, she said again, with a quiet finality, because if I run, then I become them. If I give up, then he died for nothing, and I won't let that happen. Before they could stop her, she left the room. She walked alone through the twisting corridors, past frightened eyes and silent faces. At the armory, she picked up nothing more than a flare and a broadcast amp. No guns, no armor. Just her voice and the chip. She walked out of the gate and into the dust-choked dusk where the mercenary company waited, drones hovering, weapons ready, like vultures circling a wounded beast. The captain stood at the front, smug and untouched. He raised a brow as she approached. No weapon. Bold. She held up the chip. This is what you want, right? He nodded. Hand it over and maybe I let you crawl back to your cave. She activated the flare, jamming it into the amp and slamming the broadcast chip in. A blinding light surged upward and her voice echoed. Across the land, this is Rhea Tenmore of the Terran Resistance. I stand here as the daughter of a man murdered for peace and beside a being who chose mercy over vengeance. This is the truth you tried to silence. The footage began to play projected into the sky above them. The betrayal, the massacre, the lie exposed for all to see. All channels open, all frequencies hijacked. The captain lunged for her, screaming, but it was too late. Resistance fighters poured from the cliffs, drawn by the signal, not to kill, but to witness. The world had seen. The silence was broken. And Solace had lit the match. Asterisk, the flames from the flare had long since faded, but the world it illuminated remained forever changed. The truth had torn through the lies like light through shadow, and though the mercenaries had scattered many, captured, others fleeing into the poisoned wilds, the real battle had only just begun. Rhea returned to the enclave not as a fugitive, not as a soldier, but as something she had never imagined she could be again, a voice that mattered. The recording had spread across resistance networks like fire on dry leaves. The last fragments of humanity, hiding in craters and rusted stations, were rising not to conquer, but to uncover. Not to burn, but to rebuild. But none of it mattered, not really, if he didn't survive. She sat beside Solace every day, his body pale and motionless, his armor dulled to a pewter gray. His light had gone dark for 2 nights, and still she remained, refusing to believe that silence was the end. Technicians came and went, bringing diagnostics, Plasma transfusions, alien circuitry scavenged from old battlefields. Some said he was gone, others didn't try to guess. But Rhea never gave up. Every hour she spoke to him, stories, memories, desperate hopes whispered into the stillness of his form. "Do you remember the doll?" she said once, brushing dust from his wrist. "That moment in the riverbed, I think that was when I realized. You weren't just sparing me, you were saving me. And I don't know what it means to a Xhaari to be saved, but to me, it means everything." On. The third night, while the wind howled against the steel doors like the ghosts of the dead, something changed. A flicker. Barely visible. A soft throb of amber beneath the plates of his chest. She froze, her breath caught. Then came another slow. Stronger. A beat. He was waking. Rhea pressed her hand to his, unable to speak. Her eyes flooding with the tears she'd kept back for days. His eyes blinked open, dim but aware, and his gaze found hers. Slowly, his hand lifted not far, just enough to press 2 fingers against his scar, then against her chest, dot still here. She laughed through tears, nodded furiously, and whispered, "Yeah, we're both still here." He sat up slowly in the hours that followed, aided by texts and wires, but his strength returned. And when the council arrived, leaders of other enclaves, summoned by the truth she had unveiled, they expected to see a broken soldier and a dying alien. What they found instead was unity. Not peace, not yet, but the first step toward it. In the meeting chamber, still lined with scorch marks and old maps, Rhea stood before them with Solace at her side. There were questions, of course, doubts, but also listening. And that, more than anything, was the miracle. "Why should we trust him?" one councilwoman asked. "After all that's happened?" Rhea didn't hesitate. "Because he trusted me first, when he had every reason not to. Because he chose to save a human when he could have left me to die. Because when I told the truth, he stood beside me, not with weapons, not with fear, but with light." Solace pulsed a soft, clear blue. And for the first time in recorded history, the room didn't recoil. After the meeting, Rhea and Solace stood beneath the night sky, still cracked with smoke and dust, but clearing. One star pierced through, then another. Then she turned to him, exhausted but alive, and said, "What do we do now?" He responded not with words, but with a slow rise of golden light across his chest, a color she had learned meant hope, creation, future. Then he pointed outward, beyond the walls, beyond the ruins. "We rebuild," she whispered, understanding him. "Together." And that was how it began, not with fire, not with conquest, but with a broken woman and a grieving alien who chose, against every instinct, to forgive. They became legend, not because they fought hardest, but because they chose mercy when it cost the most. The war was not over. The stars still burned. But so did something greater now, burning not from hate or vengeance, but from the very thing no war had ever truly understood: humanity.